Welcome back to the 5th review that we are doing this week for X-Men movies. This week is going to be entailing one of the better movies that they've ever produced. X-Men First Class was directed by Mathew Vaughn and was the story of the official upbringing of the original X-Men. This is basically an origin story for Eric Lehnsherr as Magneto, and also Charles Xavier turning into Professor X. Now, I will let everybody know that maybe some of these reviews going forward may not have a ton of in-depth analysis as much as I would like, only because we're brushing up on the deadline of Deadpool and Wolverine coming out soon, and I want to be able to tell you everything to love about the X-Men movies before we get to the final one of the weird Fox-ish era, even though technically it's not in a Fox era anymore, but it seems to be the demise of it. So let's just jump into this. For starters, I love the opening scene that they had for both Eric and Charles in this movie. More specifically, Eric, actually, because at the beginning of this movie, we have a very similar scene that we do to the first X-Men movie, where it is in Poland during World War II in a Jewish camp. So we basically see this kind of reran yet again with this part, but then we cut to Westchester, where we see Charles Xavier in his mansion as a young kid. I like this because you also see that this is the first time we see Mystique as a kid too, but I will say this is the part where we start to get some continuity errors, and trust me, through the next couple of reviews that we do, it's only going to get worse. But regardless, Raven was impersonating Charles's mom, to which Charles says, "We know it's not you," and offers a place for her to stay so she doesn't have to go about stealing things ever again. But when we jump back to the stuff in Poland is the stuff that I like way more in this opening scene. You see, we get our first glimpse at Kevin Bacon playing Sebastian Shaw. I love the scene because Kevin Bacon is a really good actor when he wants to be, and this is very big proof for that. We see him basically torturing Eric by saying that if you don't move this Nazi coin I have, I'm going to shoot your mother. And when he doesn't, he ends up shooting her, and this causes a bunch of mayhem around him, and Eric eventually just kills 2 of the guards that are in the room with him and destroys all this metal stuff that's around him. And this basically is now his new weapon of choice. Now Sebastian Shaw has Eric in his hands, and he's going to use him for all of the evil that he can. Then we get into even more character development for these characters. It jumps 20 years later, and we see now the adult versions that are not as old as Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen as these characters, but we see James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as their respective characters. It's awesome to see the difference in approach for at least Charles here, because we see him kind of hitting on girls with his mutation. Basically, he's like kind of like going into their mind and reading their mind just so he has like ways to approach them and have like good pickup lines for them. So it's funny to watch, and it's entertaining to see the very different like philosophy that he has compared to like when he's old to when he was like in his younger 20s. But what I love even more in this part of the movie is Michael Fassbender in his relentless mission to go and find Shaw and kill him. There's so many scenes here where we see Fassbender walking around as Magneto, and he's basically trying to find out where Shaw is, and he kills a bunch of Nazis in his place. One of the absolute best scenes in this movie is the scene where we see him visit a bar and he kills 3 Nazis that are in there, and he has the line at the end of it where he said that he's Frankenstein's monster and he's going to find his creator. I absolutely loved this scene because the tension is built up throughout in this, because they obviously don't know him, and when it's revealed that he was one of the Jews in the camp, they end up starting to be like frantic and stuff, and one of them grabs a knife. It's just so well played out. It's just one of the best scenes that they do in this movie. But there's also great stuff with Charles, obviously mentioned before, with all the diametrically different things that he does compared to when he's older. We do get great visualization of what his power is. This person ends up finding him named Moira, who is part of the CIA, and it's funny because we get to watch him basically read her mind, and the visual and how they do it I just find kind of entertaining, because we don't get a ton of visualization as far as like reading into the mind other than like the voices and like popping flashbacks here and there. But this one was like you see her face and you see the stuff like around her as he's like trying to see what is in her mind. I just found it kind of a fun and entertaining way to show off his power. They eventually team up together, and they are now in this like CIA mutants level section for this story, to which they also are on the mission to find Sebastian Shaw, because now he is working to basically start up World War III. This is also the part where you get the planted seed of the things that'll come later on in the movie, where he tries to get Shaw out of the submarine that he is in, but he is unable to because he doesn't feel he's strong enough here. And this is the first time that the two of these characters meet with Charles and Eric. This is also the first time we get to see Nicolas Hoult play the character Hank McCoy, whose mutation is Beast, but he is not so furry in this as of yet. This is one of like the nitpicky things that I find in the story, at least for this portrayal of the character. I just don't find Nicolas Hoult's portrayal the most amazing in the world. Part of it is probably because he's kind of like on the scrawnier side, and when I think of the character Beast, I think of more along the lines of what Kelsey Grammer is, where he's a lot bigger and he's just always in the furry kind of form of the mutation that he has, or like even like in the show for the 90s show or the comics where he's just like this big hulking dude. For him just to be like a scrawny little, you know, nerd scientist, it was off-putting at first. There's also actually, I want to piggyback this on with Jennifer Lawrence as well, because Jennifer Lawrence is in this movie as Raven, or Mystique as she becomes later on, and she just doesn't do it for me personally. Especially in this movie, she kind of just comes off as like a whiny brat a lot of the times, and I don't know, I just don't buy her performance as this character all that much here. Especially with even more continuity errors too, because you get this part of the story where we see Hank and Raven kind of get into this weird love-ish sort of deal happening, and it kind of just doesn't work for me personally. But what I can praise about this after this sort of section of the movie is the direction for Mathew Vaughn here. See, Mathew Vaughn is a very talented director. I mean, he's even made the movie Kingsman, and that was pretty entertaining, and from the stuff that I've seen about it, looks pretty awesome. And then he goes on to make something like Argyle, which is just like, I don't know how you got there, dude. But regardless, one of my favorite things about the direction in this movie is some of the montages that he uses in this movie. We get a couple of them, and this is the first one that we see because we see Charles use Cerebro in kind of like the first iteration of it for the first time. And this is basically them rounding up more people that are mutants to kind of help them in this department now. And the montage with Eric and Charles kind of going around the world finding different mutants to bring to make this sort of team, I thought was pretty awesome. And if you thought this movie is played a little more straight and it needs a little bit more sass, like there's just not some sass here, well, don't worry. Even though this is an early X-Men movie, here's Wolverine with some awesome sass.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Charles Xavier.
Go fuck yourself.
And I do love the fact that they end up having this team kind of sit around together in the base of the CIA unit, and they kind of like are like, hey, this is my power and this is what my code name should be. And it just kind of like gives off this like teen high school vibe that they do here. I don't know why, it feels more believable in the sense here. This is the part where we get a lot of Sebastian Shaw's sort of development in this story, because he wants to create nuclear war in World War III, because the radiation that would settle after everything goes off would make the mutants that are surviving the radiation basically become the new population. This is what the evolution is. This is what everything that Magneto was talking about in the first couple of movies come to fruition. This then leads to a decent little fight kind of scene that happens here, where we get Shaw invading the CIA place while Charles and Eric are not there, just to gather up more of the mutants to be on his side of the story. It's fun because we get some stuff with Azazel, which is basically the red version of Nightcrawler here, and you know, with him dropping people from the sky as he teleports in and out of the building. I just found that kind of entertaining and kind of a cool visual to like, it's a different method of attack, basically. I will say there is a bit of a complaint that I have here, where they get the guy who adapts to survive any sort of like attack on him, basically, and they basically made him die in this. I don't know why, just kind of like, if that was his power and like he absorbs like this energy that was shot at him, I don't know why. It kind of was just like, if that's his power, why does he have to die in this way? But after this, we also get another great montage that I love here, which is the training scenes that we get with Charles at his mansion. We see stuff where we see Charles talking with Cassidy, who plays Banshee in here, where he's like, you have your voice and it does that high-pitched scream, but if you do it at just the right pitch, you'd be able to like basically fly off the ground. It'd be like a propeller basically for him. There's some fun stuff too with one of the characters. I can't remember his first name off the bat, and I didn't have it written down for some reason here, but his last name is Summers, which is a hint for later. He shows him how to kind of control his powers, because he has this like energy beam that he like uses against people, and he has a like this nuclear base that he uses on him. It's just fun scenes with that he does. But the biggest one that I love here the most, and it's the one that develops these characters' relationships even more than any other movie has done to this point, was when Charles and Eric are kind of talking with one another, trying to train. And Eric's like, come on, just shoot me. I can dodge the bullet, like I can deflect it. And he goes, well, you're not really challenging yourself in that sense if you know you can basically deflect a bullet. Charles challenges him to kind of turn one of the satellites a little bit towards them, but he says that it's too much to handle. So there's this great scene where Charles gets into Eric's head and he pulls out this beautiful memory that he has with his mother as a kid. And that basically gives him this kind of like balanced relationship in his mind to make him be able to turn this satellite and be able to do anything that he needs to, where he gets into that balance of serenity and rage that he called it. But the part that I don't like here that kind of leads to the end of this montage is when Hank still makes the cure for both him and Raven, because they both have a similar feeling of like, we don't want to look like this all of our lives and we have to hide ourselves, basically. He still makes this cure for the two of them, even though they are both actively training with the mutant powers that they have. He becomes a bit abrasive about it and makes her cry, basically, saying that we need this cure so you can look normal, so I can look normal. And when he takes it, the mutation only grows even worse for him, actually. So this is the first time we are now seeing Beast in this movie in the full get-up with all the fur and like the sharp teeth and the claws and all that. He looks a bit better, I guess, than just regular old Nicolas Hoult, but I'm still not sold on this look at all. But what I am sold on is the yellow suits they have here. Now, there's little hues of yellow in some of the suits here and there throughout the history of the X-Men, especially in the beginning portions of these movies. But this is the first time where you get real like solid yellow like sections of the costume. It's not just like, oh, highlighted on the shoulders, a little bit of the trimming is yellow. No, this is like the shirts are fully yellow. It is not hard to miss whatsoever, and I love it for that. This is where we get towards the end of the movie, and I do enjoy basically all of the ending of this part of the movie. There isn't really too much to complain about here. We see that America is trying to intercept Russia with the missiles that are going to cross to Cuba, so it doesn't obviously instigate the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is then where the first iteration of the X-Men kind of meet up to try and stop Shaw from instigating this war, basically. And some of the best parts about this scene is the part where we finally get to see Eric lifting up the submarine. And it hits at home way more in this movie because you get way more of an attachment with the character, and you really see him build up the confidence in doing things to where he can do something where, in a scale of like compared to like when Ian McKellen moved the Golden State Bridge, yes, that's impressive, and I do find that to be kind of cool, but having Eric kind of fight the inner demons and really push himself to like do better here and lift up the submarine and be like, I have to do this right now, is so beautiful. But at the end of the day, Eric cannot fight what his purpose was at the very beginning of this story. Eric eventually has Shaw beat, where he ends up taking the first time we see the helmet go on someone's head to block any sort of telepathic powers to them. He puts it on as Shaw is frozen in place, and there's a callback with the Nazi coin. And Eric tells him that we agree on many things here, but the issue is that you've killed my mother. So now you have to die. And he does the same thing he did before, where he says, I'm going to give it to the count of 3 and this coin will move. But as he's counting, the coin is already moving, and it goes right down the middle of his head through the back part of it. And there's such great editing here too, because it focuses on Shaw, but it cuts back to Charles as he's screaming, because he's obviously inside his brain to keep him frozen. And just the editing back and forth here with this was so awesome. This is where Eric eventually reveals himself and says that the real enemy is the humans and they are about to fire on us. This then causes a little bit of a fight to happen between Magneto and Eric here, where they're both trying to tell each other to see their points of view, and they just do not agree on the fundamental levels of this. But the real purpose of this little interaction here is to finally show how Charles is paralyzed. Moira was shooting at Magneto and eventually deflects one of the bullets to hit Charles in the back, so now he is paralyzed. Because Eric is so upset by this and none of the ships eventually blew up because they stopped him just in time, Eric eventually makes the first iteration of the Brotherhood here, where he invites all the villains to kind of team up with him and leave, and he also gets Raven to join with him as well. This movie ends with Charles making Moira forget anything that happened after the Cuban Missile Crisis, so they do not know where the mansion is. They do not know how to contact Charles whatsoever, and we see Eric go and break Emma Frost out of prison by donning the moniker of Magneto in one of the worst costumes I'd ever seen for a superhero in my entire life. I mean, just look at it. Just look at how bad that is. It just looks like something that was just thrown together last minute. Like, oh, we got to do something like red and purple. This movie is fantastic. There's so much to love about it, but I think the casting is one of the biggest pluses in this movie. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as the younger versions of Magneto and Professor X proved to be exceptional in this role. I have my days where I like one over the other, and I do tend to like Patrick Stewart a little bit more than McAvoy at the end of the day, but definitely Ian McKellen and Michael Fassbender is a real tough choice, especially within the first couple of films that they're in. Once you get after Days of Future Past, it's a little hard to kind of like Fassbender's character, but we'll eventually get to that later. But for now, love the iteration of these characters. This movie really brings the tension for the characters that the first couple of X-Men movies didn't really have. We knew that the two of them were friends before and that they both shared a similarity in some instance of the philosophy that they had, but they just never could really get together and there was always butting heads. This movie shows exactly how it happened, and it does it in flying colors. I just love the dynamic between everyone. Everyone felt like they had really good chemistry here, and it's really underratedly funny. There's a lot of funny jokes in here that they do, especially in regards to Charles's power as well. I found a lot of it kind of like really good stuff. Again, the montages that they do in this movie where they cut back and forth is great to see, and the fights that they do for the most part are pretty solid. All in all, it is one of the better X-Men movies that were ever made, but sit back and relax because this has created so much continuity errors, and well, we're not stopping yet. I'm going to give X-Men First Class 4 stars. Thank you guys so much for watching. Look forward to more reviews very soon. Remember, all my socials are down below. You could see all the things that I post on like TikTok or Twitter talking about film stuff in general. Take it easy, guys, and I will talk to you all next time.